one of our tenants who called to report this. He does use his car quite frequently, but he doesn't use it every day because he walks to work, and this is something I think that we should encourage. And so he wound up, because he was there for 2 nights, he wound up with 2 tickets on his car. And he tried to call up the city attorney's office about this and asked that the tickets be dismissed because he wasn't in violation of any sign. The city attorney, perhaps interested more in revenue than in doing the right thing, refused to dismiss the tickets, and he's going to court to fight them. He called the city manager's office. The city manager's office said that by merely parking overnight, he was storing his car there, which he is not, and did also refuse to help him. So, council, you are the bosses here. You're the boss of the police department and the city manager's office, and you make the rules. And right now, again, there's no official sign posting what the rules are. So I'd like you to take this into consideration and try to make sure that the right thing happens. I think that we should definitely have the tickets dismissed. I think we definitely should make sane rules for the downtown parking lots and make sure that residents who have no place else to park do have some place to park overnight. But in any case, I'm asking you to step in and do something about this, because there are plans to bring in more downtown residents, to have as many as 300 new residents in downtown that council has actually approved. And there's no way that we can do this because there's not enough parking as it is. We certainly shouldn't be reducing the amount of parking that's available now. So anyway, that's all I have to say this evening. I hope that you will take action. Please feel free to contact me offline. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Glass. Do we have any other public comments on non-agenda items? Okay, seeing that, I see the mayor has joined us. So Mayor Weaver, you want to jump in here? Thanks.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And I see that we are all set to get started. So we'll begin our work session for the campus update, and I'm going to turn it over to the city manager.
Hello, Mayor and Council. Good evening. As you know, each fall we invite the University of Wyoming president and the Associated Students of the University of Wyoming to a work session with council to kind of give an update on the goings-on on the campus as school commences each fall semester. So that is the schedule for tonight, and I know we have folks from the university with us there. I think they're ready to address you.
Thank you, City Manager, and welcome, Dr. Seidel, President Seidel. We really appreciate you making time to be here with us for this check-in. And I'll turn it over to you. It will be pretty free format here, but over to you to start.
Thanks.
With.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, really looking forward to chatting with you this evening, and thanks for having me. I guess I'll start with a perhaps roughly 10-minute kind of overview, and then happy to have questions and so on. I think I have Mike Smith, our new VP for Legislative Affairs and Community Engagement, and Bill Mai, VP for Operations, on the Zoom as well. So they may chime in with some comments or may have some more details on some questions that you might have. But anyway, let me just start by saying we are excited that we are fully open, back in business, I think for the first time, actually, since I arrived more than 2 years ago. I'm in my 3rd year here, if you can believe that. And we're pretty excited about what's happening. We had a big kind of opening party on Prexy's pasture last week. We had a big event for students for an entire week in a program called Saddle Up, which is aimed at improving student success. That seems to have been generally very successful. We had a lot of parents here and so on over the last weekend in particular, and I'll come to a few details on that. But it's been a hard couple of years getting going into this program for me, especially coming in with budget cuts and COVID and so on. But just I think the mood on campus has really, really shifted, and I'm personally feeling very good about it. I think the campus is generally so. We worked hard in the last couple of years to build our team. So you know all well better than I do the difficulties the administration had faced over some years. I was told, and I checked, it was right. I was the 6th president in 7 years, and I'm now in my 3rd year and really loving it here. and enjoy it. And I've spent a lot of time working to build my team for the administration. So we've hired roughly, including one search that's underway, half a dozen new cabinet members, including Executive Vice President and Provost Kevin Carmen, and a number of others that have helped fill out our team. We're working really well together as a team. And there's just the one search for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're down to the finalists for the VP for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and happy to answer any questions on that. But that feels really good. And likewise, in the last 2 years, we've had to fill 6 deanships, and we filled them all. And so we don't have a single dean or a search that's underway right now. And the people are fabulous. I mean, just really, really pleased. We got our top choices, and our choices were very good. So anyway, just a vote of confidence in our team. A bit of a budget update. I think if you followed carefully, my first year, we had fairly significant budget cuts that required us to do some restructuring. And I think we took some very strong actions to prepare us for the future, including reorganizing some of our colleges and creating some new programs that I know will be growth areas, in particular, a new school of computing that's underway right now. We've had a new appointment. Steve Farkas is the Associate Vice President for Economic Development. We never had that before. And I think I was once upon a time a vice president for economic development and also vice president for research. So this is something I think about all the time. How can the university help to grow the economy? And I'll come back to that in a minute. But we're really, really interested in partnering with the city in particular, but also the state more broadly on economic development topics. We have started to that end a new center for entrepreneurship and innovation that has brought in a really well-known entrepreneur and a PhD in pharmacy and biochemistry, Penelope Shihab. A number of you will have met her. That has both a corporate partnership program as well as an entrepreneurship program. I see Fred here. Fred's very familiar with what we're doing around entrepreneurship and expanding on our activities with the Impact 307 hub here in Laramie and across the state with a network of these hubs. And another new program that we started last year is called the Worth Initiative, the Wyoming Outdoor Recreation, Tourism, and Hospitality Initiative. And we thought a lot about this by looking at what markets in the state are needing some support from the university in order to grow. And tourism and hospitality is the number 2 market in terms of economic impact on the state. And so we hope to be able to support that. Happy to talk about that. And so really importantly, we also have funding from the state through the America Rescue Plan for the thing called the Wyoming Innovation Partnership, or the WIP initiative. And so far to date, $55 million has been earmarked for that program, including all of the community colleges. And we meet very, very often. The teams meet weekly. The presidents meet roughly monthly to go through all kinds of things we're working on together. But they're focused specifically on programs that we think will help advance the state's, both the workforce and the economy of the state. So entrepreneurship, energy, hospitality and tourism, computing and technical skills, corporate partnerships. These are the kinds of things that we are really focused on. And the legislature appropriated another $27 million for the third year of the WIP initiative, assuming we achieve certain milestones and so on. So about half of that funding is coming to UW so far altogether. The final $27 million still to be determined exactly how that's distributed, but that's roughly the idea there. So we're focused a lot on partnering with you all for economic development purposes. We also, just to give a quick budget update, I tossed a little bit of that in there, but last year, after a really tough year, I see the boom and bust cycles of the state of Wyoming can be shorter than I would have imagined. But last year, we were able to achieve an extra $185 million beyond the block grant. And I would say one thing that was really important for us was to focus on raises for our staff, also our faculty, but our staff in particular are some of them really in harm's way in terms of the salaries not being adequate. So we had a lot of focus on that. It wasn't adequate. We spent, in spite of the $16 million in raises that we achieved, but many of them are just our neighbors and our friends here that live in Laramie. So we're doing our best for them. The trustees in my office added an extra $2 million to that on a one-time basis for staff members that make less than $60,000 a year. And our top priority for this year's off-cycle budget request to the state is additional funding for salaries, particularly for staff and also for faculty. So $10 million is in our budget request coming up this coming year for staff. So we're really trying to do our best for people who make up our neighbors and and people who do the work around the university that really keep us running. So let me move on just a couple more topics and then I'll stop. For planning for the university's future, we have a new strategic plan that's been underway for quite a few months since last spring. There is a draft of it that has been posted to the Academic Affairs website. It includes a lot of things from academic programming to diversifying our revenue streams. We talk a lot about the university being more entrepreneurial. So we think the state is, in spite of budget cuts that were forced on all of us, the state has generally been quite good to the university. But we need to use that as a sort of a basis to build additional revenue streams. Say from research and development, we're going to work very hard on increasing National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, National Institutes of Health, and other funding from agencies, also corporate partnerships and philanthropy. We have a very healthy foundation here that does a great job in raising funds and nearly $800 million endowment, which is extraordinary for a university of our size. So anyway, strategic planning also includes a lot of work on economic development. And within that, I have a working group that has been going for some months now, and it's under the leadership of Parag Chitnis, our new VP for Research and Economic Development. And it includes things like beginning a plan for a research park that I know there have been plans before me, but they're not really very active until recently. So we're looking to partner with the city on plans for bringing in companies that would like to partner with the university, either to work with our students or our faculty, and hopefully that would bring new jobs to the city. And in other towns, research parks have added literally billions of dollars to the local economy over time. So it's something that we're really interested in talking with you about as we develop our initial plans. Also, flow of venture capital is important to support new companies that might be formed out of the Impact 307 hub. So these are ideas. We have a lot of things to talk about going forward very early on. So no, you haven't missed a boat in talking with us. And I know Steve Farkas, I'm sure, is talking with a number of you. I'll just conclude by saying a couple things about some exciting developments that are just happening right now. So we are working with Trey Sherwood in the Main Street Alliance right now on a new course that will be taught next fall, at least in our planning, the so-called innovation course, where problems can be posed by the Main Street Alliance or by the city or others to us. How would we think about growing tourism and hospitality in Laramie? What about building the creative economy in the city of Laramie and those kind of things? What would we do? And so the idea is to take students and faculty from departments all across the university to spend a semester to really look at these issues and then try to come up with solutions, including business plans if there were if they were needed and so on. So that's one thing. We're dedicated to working with the city, not just with the administration, but all the way through our students and faculty. Also, some of you know, I guess all of you know, that the company Plenty is proposing an expanded R&D operation in Laramie, and we've been involved in that very deeply. The Wyoming Business Council last week approved a request that you had made for $20 million to build out their R&D operations, and I'm still waiting the SLIB board to approve that finally. But we are prepared to do a lot to work with them to grow academic programs and R&D programs with Plenty and others potentially as a result of that whole conversation. So I'm hopeful that goes through. I'm very excited, and there's more like that to come around things coming from Impact 307 and the WIP initiative. One thing that's relevant for all this, we have a kind of a mixed story on student enrollment. First time students are up over 10% this year. That's really very good, including more than 10% from out of state, a little bit less than 10% from in-state. Overall enrollment is slightly down, just a few percent. That's directly a reflection of COVID years that brought enrollment down at community colleges that then feeds students to us. And so their enrollments are down. And so that's led to a small decrease in the past years. But overall, so we're down slightly overall, but we have a really good sign in terms of first year students coming in up over 10%. And one thing I hope you all have noticed, when our parents from the students came in, we spent a lot of effort promoting the city. So there was work on, a grab bag of sort of coupons and discounts and encourage people to go to the farmers market and so on. So we're doing things that we hope will increase our interactions with the city. And finally, I will just mention the construction update. Bill Mai has been meeting with a number of you on a regular basis on things, but the new parking garage up on Ivanton, just across the street from Old Main, is underway. I'm sure you've all noticed that. It should be finished around the 1st of January. We're having the law school expansion project on Friday, I think it is. Senator Simpson will be here to commemorate the expansion of the Simpson Center at the law school. The stadium and the swimming pool, the auditorium have been approved, and so they're under final planning. And the dormitory is also is in a fairly advanced stage of getting ready to go under construction. And so a lot of things going on. That's probably, I hope that's not too much, but I just wanted to give you the breadth of what's going on in a nutshell. So any questions, happy to take them, or maybe some of my colleagues will see Bill there, and maybe Mike Smith is also here.
Thank you, President Seidel. I think I'd like to extend that opportunity for Mr. Smith or Mr. Mai to go ahead and add anything they want, if they want to. Otherwise, we'll get into questions. Okay. Mr. Smith, your camera's on, so I'll go to you first.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just nothing other than to introduce myself. I'm a Laramie boy. I grew up here. My mom was an elementary school principal in Laramie, and my dad worked at the university for a lot of years. And I'm just thrilled to be here and look forward to working with you all on moving forward as a community.
Thanks a lot, and appreciate to hear a little bit about you and meet you, and thanks for being here with us. President Seidel, I think maybe we'll go to questions now, and I'll just make a quick comment as far as the amount in your presentation. We understand there's a lot going on up there. It's not really for us to say, or frankly, I would even suggest for you to say what's too much and it's just what's happening, right? So we'll do our best. We'll do our best. Questions for President Seidel on this? I'm game. President Seidel, I listened keenly to your part of the presentation about the student enrollment situation, and that's great to hear about the first-time enrollment. Appreciate hearing a little bit about the background for returning students and so forth. What kind of data are we looking at now for community colleges this year? Because they do, as you say, play that really important feeder role, for lack of a better term, for people that want to go on to four-year programs for the most part. And I'm just curious, are we getting an indication of an enrollment uptick in those institutions now that will potentially boost the University of Wyoming in the next couple of years to come?
That's a really good question. I don't know the numbers, actually, although we do meet regularly, but we could easily get those numbers. Kyle Moore would know, or others in our office. They were down quite significantly in the last couple of years. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but I do actually have a little cheat sheet here on transfers from community colleges. We're down almost 10%, and so, but that is actually less than the overall decline in community college students. And so we've done pretty well in the yield of students from the community colleges. Just that's the extra color that I can add to that right now. But I'm sure we could get those numbers and pass them on to you for what the enrollment in the community colleges are. Our own numbers, I only just got today, by the way, just like an hour ago. So we're people wait until around this time of September before they release new numbers.
That's perfectly understandable, and I don't know that it's necessary for you folks to spend additional staff time on grouping those numbers for us. But the reason we ask, of course, number one, it's important to Laramie to be abreast of what's going to happen in terms of enrollment, and then number two, we've made a commitment to the extent that we can to partner with the LCCC Albany County campus here to try to support them. And I think the university has largely done the same, is my understanding. And it's just something to kind of keep an awareness of. And I think it has a relevance to any question, to any conversation about the University of Wyoming, is what our community college partners are looking at as well. So I appreciate that background. Got some other questions here after I broke the ice. That's typically how it goes, President Seidel. So I'll go to Councilmember Harrington, and then I'll go to Councilmember Somerville. Councilmember Harrington.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. President Seidel, I know you're aware the average age of Laramie residents is something like 26 years old, or something considerably lower than really anywhere else in the state. I think largely attributed to you all. And I think that's a really pretty significant benefit for our community. And that sort of kicked a thought in my head as you were talking about your hiring efforts, as well as sort of your efforts to sort of be on the front edge of economic development. And I think I'm in my mid-30s. I oftentimes find myself sort of out of my depth when it comes to that sort of front end, cutting edge of economic development. It can often feel kind of like a foreign space to me because things are changing kind of rapidly. And I'm curious if you have had any sort of efforts to bring any younger folks into leadership roles at the university and really try to build that pipeline of getting folks early experience. I mean, I think maybe not as directly connected to, directly connected to the university, not directly connected to your administration. Plenty is obviously a young company, and we've seen what that can do for our community. So I guess that's sort of where my question comes from. And so I guess largely just curious if you've had any sort of successes in that arena, or if you've got anything you'd like to share.
I guess I have a couple comments on that. So, I mean, first of all, let me just take a step back just on student enrollment, because clearly that's where a lot of the youthfulness of Laramie comes from, is the number of students we have. We had a retreat last July with the Board of Trustees, and we did talk about enrollment and what's the ideal size for the university. And we didn't come up with a number, but we're going to start really looking at that very hard. But we anticipate trying to grow the size of the university. I mean, not enormously, but I think we're below critical mass in some areas, and it would help us a lot. I think just to have some critical mass in our programs, and it would add that a sort of a stronger kind of youth component to the town as well. I didn't mention this, but we did just open the graduate school, which is focuses on master's and PhD programs. And honestly, I think as we grow that program, and that will help us grow our research portfolio and so on, those students tend to be in their, say, early to mid 20s. I didn't finally finish grad school till I was, I think, 29 or something like that. So the point is, there would be a group, of sort of increasing size of a group, if our plans go according to plan, that would allow us to grow that cohort. And those tend to be the kinds of people who hang out more downtown, frequent restaurants, and in the bars and art galleries and so on. So I think that would add an economic development sort of component as well, just in terms of who those students are and what they would do. We have talked about we haven't implemented this yet, but I'm interested in a sort of a leadership program to grow our internal staff and faculty. I did implement just in the last few weeks a so-called faculty fellows program where we selected 4 faculty. Some are senior, some are junior faculty, one's an assistant professor, to sort of provide some ability for them to grow beyond their teaching and research duties and to sort of learn more about administration and to be more engaged in helping, for example, working with communities and so on. So that's part. Also, our community engagement program is something that Mike is overseeing just the beginnings of that. And there's a particular part of that which is called becoming a Carnegie engaged university, which requires, in order to be certified, that we do certain things that directly engage with communities, not just going to Rotary clubs, but really thinking about what do we do with our students and faculty and staff to get them engaged in community affairs. And so these are things we'll be focusing on going forward. I mean, I could talk a lot about entrepreneurship and that sort of thing. So that's really on our docket too. So, I mean, all these sectors in the next few years, if we're able to do what we would like, we will be growing.
That's great, Mr. President. I appreciate that and can appreciate how many balls you're sort of juggling at once. And then I would just say, Mr. Mayor, if I can, congratulations on the STEM building. I understand that's opening this week.
Yeah, I'm giving a talk actually for, I hope they'll try to cut me off at 40 minutes, but it talks about aimed at kind of a high school level, how advances in science lead directly to economic development and innovation with things that change our lives. And so I think that's going to be somewhere around between 12 and 2, something like that. I forget exactly, but it'll be at the science building. So. And we're going to have a Nobel laureate in physics coming in by video to talk about new methodologies in teaching science, if you're interested in that. So,
Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor, and welcome, President Seidel. Thanks for joining us tonight. My question really resolves maybe 2 topics that I think are kind of maybe one answer. Housing certainly continues to be on the forefront of discussions for the city of Laramie. Obviously, we host a number of the UW students in as off-campus residents after their freshman year here in the city, and we certainly continue to face those challenges in access and affordability in the housing market. Second to that, you guys are undergoing a huge construction project in terms of the dorms, the likes of which this community has not seen in terms of investment and scope of the project in long past the time I've been in Laramie, a number of years. It's a huge, massive project. And I guess my question is, how do we reboot maybe that town-gown relationship so that we're having some of these discussions together and collaborating more on how to make that work across the board? If that seems like a fair question.
A very fair question. And so, I mean, we're all in to do this. We've had a couple meetings with some city council members on how do we expand out our operation of not just our operation, but our collaboration around particularly the construction projects. That tends to be what absorbs a lot of the discussion. But I want to go beyond that to talk about exactly some of the issues you're talking about, housing in particular. I mean, I face that. I'm pretty pleased that we built a house just south of Laramie off of 287 here. It's beautiful. We from our point of view, we're making an investment in the community here, but we also recognize when we're recruiting people, now we know we need to get them to sign their contracts before they see a realtor. It's not that easy to find housing. So some things we've begun to do that in the long term can help address this. We have a rapidly growing construction management program. It's not lost on us that that's an important part of what you need in order to run a construction firm that would build homes. I'm really eager, maybe in that innovation course or any other way, to get working groups together to talk about how to address housing issues in the town. It's not just in Laramie, of course, it's across the whole state and I mean, also in other parts of the country, but it seems acute here. So anything you would suggest on what we ought to do, including creating a working group jointly with some of our faculty and our staff, I would be all in for that.
Thank you, President. I appreciate that. From my perspective, I serve on the UW Town Gown Committee, which deals primarily with some different areas. not necessarily this type of level, but getting that collaboration going on a regular basis seems to really be fruitful. You can develop those strong partnerships over time. One of the challenges we certainly face is that it's not always the same faces in the seats on either side of the house. Elections come and go, and leadership kind of changes at UW in various positions. And so building those out on an ongoing basis, I think, would be really beneficial to both of us. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Councilmember Gabriel.
Thanks, Mayor. President Seidel, thank you for being here tonight. There was a discussion among the state legislative body, some members anyway, recently in the spring about some of the topics of instruction on the campus. And I think it really was a concern to some around the state about the legislature being involved in maybe some of the topics that the university was teaching, some of the departments. And I know that you have engaged in discussions with some of the state legislators on that. I'm curious how that is going. Do you see progress in that area?
I would say I see progress. I appreciate the question, by the way, and it is something that it's concerned us, and I think it's concerned some people, also some of the legislators who look at what the university does, and sometimes we need to explain why these things are important. But in particular, there was a concern about gender studies at the university, and we worked very, very hard. Not so much in the front pages of the newspapers, but just behind the scenes in dialogues with legislators to make sure that people understood what's going on. Occasionally, there are things that happen that, for example, stories that a student couldn't get the courses they wanted, and instead they felt that they needed to take gender studies or whatever. So some things like that. Sometimes those are just not true, and other times there are things that the university isn't like one person, and not everything goes exactly according to the way you'd like it. So, I mean, the point is we're in dialogue. I think it's important that we really deal with these things. I'm very proud of our programs, actually, and I do feel like there's progress, but it's going to be a continuing discussion because the legislature is also, according to the primaries at least, has changed over significantly. And so we're going to have a lot of these conversations again to start over again, I would say, this year. But anyway, I would just say we are in dialogues. We don't ignore this. We hear it. We talk to people. And generally, I think we try to make ourselves understood.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gabriel. Dr. Seidel, I can't let that piece of the conversation slide without throwing a comment in. I do wonder sometimes and find myself concerned. I know that students deciding where they want to go to school these days do a lot of research, and they do a holistic, I think, amount of research with their parents, with their guidance counselors, and with them, as an individual as well, in terms of deciding where they want to go to school. And I must say, I do sometimes wonder and have some concerns about the impact of what a potential student might read about goings on in the state of Wyoming and the interactions between the government and the university, and how that might impact their decision about where they want to go to school, because they're looking at the climate. So I think it's important for those discussions to continue and to move forward as you've committed that they will. But I think those things can affect enrollment, which we discussed earlier just a few minutes ago. I think those conversations can be very relevant. So that's just my 2 cents.
Mr. Mayor, we talk about this a lot, and I mean, every state has its complexities, and I think we recognize that Wyoming is a conservative state. It's also a beautiful state. It has so much to offer, and it's a bit of the new University of Wyoming. We've really are not only we've created new programs that we think will be attractive to students, but we're with our strategic plan, we're committed to continuing that kind of thing. So, but I hear you, and we're having those same discussions.
I really appreciate that, and I understand the considerable difficulty in these discussions. At the same time, as somebody that right now is responsible for trying to look at what's best for Laramie. What's best for Laramie is having a thriving university that's attracting students from all over the country, because although some of us may wish that our domestic, if you want to call it that, student population was enough to keep the university in a position to not just survive, but thrive, the reality is that is not the case. And in fact, the university needs to be attracting and be a competitive option for students all over the country. So I think it's very much a concern. Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty, for waiting patiently for me to get my little 2 cents in on that topic, but it's over to you.
President Siddell, thanks for joining us, and we appreciate all the work that you've been doing with the city. I just feel like I have to say, most of us are pretty worried sick about 15th Street that the university has, because the vision of having like a fairway from the Union to performing arts. I know that a former senator wants the campus green, but we really want north-south transportation. But the thing that concerns me as much is losing that parking by the Union, because it's already a nightmare for people with disabilities. I've witnessed things that are just terrible when somebody's trying to attend an event at A&S, like winter graduation, and trying to get around to the bus, and then the bus taking off when somebody in a walker is trying to get to the bus. And if we also lose the Union lot, because the Union, you can get in and then, you can roll all the way to A&S, and you can roll to anything at the Union, and you can shop at the UW store, and you can go to the copy center. And to lose that parking, I think is, and then the other thing is students use it at night when you're coming back to go do research at the library. And then I worry about students all over that are coming back at night to do lab work. And I'm sure you're familiar with that, when you have to come in the middle of the night or something to check on samples or check on some process. And so if we make the parking so far from those facilities, and I really worry about where people are going to park if they have to go into the STEM or engineering building at night. I just want to put a plug for, please think about or remember those students coming back at night and the people that are trying to get around with wheelchairs and walkers, because that vision of I call it a fairway because that's what it looks like from the Union to performing arts. I don't think it's compatible with us using the university and all the use that it gets in those buildings. Thanks. I just had to put a plug in there. Thank you.
Well, thanks for the comment and the question. I'll just say, you won't be surprised that you're not the first person who's brought this up. We've been talking about this a lot. I'll say we're completely committed to doing what's necessary to have a safe campus in with the parking changes that will be occurring here. And we've talked a lot. The ASUW has, in fact, they may even make a comment about this, as certainly the faculty senate, the staff senate. We've had a conversation with the board of trustees and so on. And I don't know if I could put Bill Nye on it, that maybe. Seems like Bill just disappeared. I don't know if he's still there or not, but Bill
here.
Has, oh, there he is. Bill,
here.
I don't know if you could give any update on that. I think that might be helpful.
Sure. Happy to weigh in. So those, Mr. Mayor, those considerations were all part of the housing plan development. Some of that was, a fair amount of this is actually prescribed in law, in session law, what is going to happen east of the Union. So that was determined in session law to be green space. There is a traffic plan that allows for some accessible parking back behind the Union still, a little bit of student parking back there that has certain conditions on it. And then there is also a traffic flow route around the east side of the Union for paratransit and actually for just the normal bus transit. Out in front of the Union on the 13th Street side of things, that also is due for an upgrade, and that will be a major bus transit point for our bus system, and so you can be picked up and dropped off right there at the Union on both sides. We also have a plan for a little bit of parking on that 13th Street piece over there by Co and Night Hall and the Union there. So some of that will also be accessible parking there. From a safety standpoint, the UWPD will be relocated into that new garage. The new garage then is, of course, right there, right across the street from Old Main and from Hoyt and all that back in there. That's also part of the safety consideration of the kind of revamping of campus. But in no small part of this is the fact that a major component of the parking garage on Ivinson, there will be covered bus access. It will become not the central hub, but a critical hub for UW Transit. And so there will be regular routes that circle the campus and go into covered bus access on the south side of that parking garage. So you'll be able to get to just about any place on campus within about 10 minutes via the parking garage and via other lots. So and the other thing is, as far as total parking spaces, so the parking that's over there on the northeast corner of the campus, actually those spaces are going to be offset by, it depends how you count it, but by about 250 spaces. There will be an additional 250 spaces after the loss of those 3 parking areas on the northeast corner of campus. So you take that loss, you replace it, and you add 250 under the current plan. It's going to take a little while. It'll be middle of next summer, I would say, before all of that's online. But all of that space that we own over there north of campus, that is intended to be surface lots. So there are some surface lots currently in place over by STEM, by the science building, and by engineering. There's some surface parking there. We're going to add to that with some of the actions that hopefully we're going to take in this trustees meeting beginning tomorrow. And those additional surface lots should be available certainly by July 1st of 23. So a lot of parking coming on, some parking going off, an awful lot of additional bus access all the way around the perimeter of campus and up into 13th Street in front of the Union and around back behind the Union.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that the bus component of that is huge. I wonder if you might address a little bit of those concerns around the traffic 15th question that the council member posed a little bit with regard to how the plan that we're both working off of seeks to ensure that those traffic flows can both accommodate that bus system, which is critical based on the parking stuff that you outlined for us, and that's well understood. I'll give you a crack at that if you'd like.
Sure, Mayor Weaver, I'll do my best for you. We currently run buses up and down 15th Street as you know. They currently go in behind the Union quite a bit. What is going to change, I would say a major change once all of this is completed is that there'll be a big loop that goes around in addition to going in behind the Union. That'll stay. But the piece going around 15th Street will go up to Bradley, I guess. And there'll be stops along the north sides of engineering and science, I believe, or maybe it's STEM and science. I'll get you the map as envisioned. But that thing will, and I'm trying to remember if it must be a clockwise loop kind of going that way. 9th Street, 15th Street, Bradley, and Ivinson. So, a fair amount of bus traffic. Like I say, if you're on 15th Street now, you see a fair amount of bus traffic too. So the intent is not to stop traffic on 15th Street. That hasn't been part of the trustees' action or the state's action or anything else. What has been discussed is we know there's going to be significant impact up at that corner of Willett and what used to be, Lewis, that eventually all of Lewis, I assume, will be closed, but you guys vacated, you agreed to the vacation of the area of Lewis between 14th and 15th. So that kind of intersection there is less of an issue now, but certainly that area at 15th and Willett will have a lot more traffic, I assume, just because of the traffic that's necessary to keep those dorms functioning. So you'll have deliveries, you'll have students, you'll have trash services. And so as you've seen, and as we're currently working through, I thought I saw Brooks on here earlier, but I guess I don't. Todd's on here, he knows, and Janine knows. All of us are working together right now, our architects, our campus planning folks, and everybody. We're all trying to work together to figure out what the best solution is there at 15th and Willett. I personally like our solution. The solution that we've proposed is a roundabout at 15th and Willett, and I think you're going to see a lot better traffic flow through there without a light and with that roundabout notion. Not that we want to get into that whole discussion here. I know with certain folks that's a loaded discussion, but I do believe that's a pretty good solution. I'm really hopeful that the city will see it as a good enough solution that we'll be able to do it also on 22nd and Willett, quite frankly. I think instead of seeing traffic backed up from Willett clear down to Reynolds, like you do at 8 o'clock in the morning, I think you're going to see that intersection flow an awful lot better if we can sort of duplicate that roundabout notion that we're talking about at 15th and Willett. If we can do that at 22nd and Willett, I think you're going to see a lot of traffic flow improvement on all of those streets. So just want to reiterate the intent of the entire housing project has not been to close 15th Street. And I know there's a lot of concern about that, and that's not in any of our plans. I will tell you, as kind of an aside, for anybody that's on this call, maybe even to my president here, we have a UW construction page now that has links to all of our project plans, to our project budgets, to trustee actions, all that sort of thing. And so really, I think a lot of your questions could get answered if you go and study those documents there too. And they have nice pictures with them too.
Vice President Meyer, I really appreciate your efforts at this. It was not my intention that we were going to get into this topic tonight, although I do not control what is raised by individual council members at the meeting. So I appreciate your time and effort. I'd also like to remind the council that we have the commissioners waiting patiently since 6 o'clock to join us for another important joint meeting. I'm not sure why that was scheduled, except that our calendar is difficult. Councilmember Harrington, bearing that in mind, as I know you will, over to you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'll keep that in mind. Vice President Mai, I'm curious if I know you serve a considerable amount of the community through bus service already. That feels like the easiest win for reducing the number of cars parked around campus. It feels like the way to really decrease the need for increasing parking, decreasing traffic flows, really all of these things that we're seeing as problems along the way. And I'm curious if expanding bus service outside of that like south lot on 15th Street, so maybe to the northern part of Laramie, maybe to West Laramie, if those have been topics of conversation. And Mr. Mayor, I would say I think this is something the commissioners would be interested in as well. So that's why I kept it up as a question.
Mayor Weaver, happy to respond if you'd like me to. So that was part of the notion, Councilman, of putting that bus facility out on South 15th, was to expand ultimately its capacity without negatively impacting campus or the rest of the city. This is kind of an area out there where we had some room, we had the property. It's on that direct route on 15th Street for us and for you guys, and I think it makes a lot of sense. You've got a corridor there, and also to your point, we're trying to provide easy access from remote places. So whether it's over east, kind of over by the baseball fields, or whether it's south down by the bus area, or whatever it is, we want to make it so that you can park your vehicle, get on a bus, and get to anywhere on campus you want to go. As you know, and as you've pointed out, we do have a fair amount of bus service that goes downtown and to the eastern part of the city, and that's all been part of some, well, I won't even say some, I'll say lengthy discussions with the city, the county, with the state, and it continues with UW. And what happens with West Laramie, what happens with the northern part of town, I think that continues to be on our radar and be part of our thinking for sure.
Thank you. Council, we have the unique position of being partners with the University of Wyoming as the local government agency, and of course partners with the county commissioners as the other local government agency here. I think this has been a good and positive update. I think there are a number of these conversations that need to go on offline. And I think we need to immediately begin the other work session. We're going to postpone the other portion of the work session, and we need to immediately begin with the other portion of the work session with the council, with the county commission. I want to thank our guests from the University of Wyoming. Thank you very much for being here. And I'll be communicating with the ASUW representative ASAP. I'll reach out to them this evening. But we very much appreciate this, and thank you very much for your time.
Nice to see you all. Take care.
Nice to see you. And we're going to go ahead now. The scheduling has been tight. So with that said, let's begin with Mr. Tini, and let's please have the county commissioners led into this meeting and begin this work session now. Thank you. Mr. Tini, I have you up for staff first.
Mayor, Council, good evening. The meeting this evening is related to the Laramie Area Growth Plan. And you'll see, I'll let you know, the commissioners are jumping on here. You'll also see county staff on this meeting, David Gertsch, and then you'll see our consultant Cameron Gloss with Logan Simpson. They are the firm that was hired by the city and the county to work on this long-range growth plan. And so kind of with that, what I'm going to do is turn it over to Cameron. Cameron's going to kind of kick us off, I think, with mostly a presentation and kind of explain what the expectation is there. I think it's a pretty interactive opportunity for council and the commissioners to provide input and direction regarding this long-range growth plan. So Cameron, take it away.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Mayor. members of the council and commissioners. I really appreciate the time this evening. I'd ask the city clerk if you could bring up the presentation. I'm on the road today and having some kind of slow internet. So if you could do that, I'd appreciate it. I just wanted to, start by also thanking the city and the county planning staffs. I just want to impress upon you all as leaders how well your professional staff has performed over the last several months. Frankly, as a consultant team, we would not be here at this point with this level of success without their assistance. They've just done a tremendous job. Next slide, please. So tonight we're going to talk about the growth scenarios that have been considered, and we talk about the growth or the footprint of Laramie. It's really how big does Laramie get in terms of its expanse outwardly, and then what's the pattern of development? That's really the thrust of the analysis that we've done so far, and then what are the implications in terms of the long-term regulation of land, whether it's development standards, their incentives, procedural aspects of land development, both in the city and the county, and then how do you solidify those parameters through an agreement? And we're gonna go through all of those elements and then talk a little bit about sort of the next steps in the process and the schedule. Next slide, please. So we're moving along pretty quickly. We started back in March. And you can see from this schedule that we're almost 3/4 of the way through. So the first phase being really setting the foundation. We had the chance to meet with a lot of folks in the community, really a range of interests, property owners, development entities, folks from service districts, a lot of analysis that based on data. And then we have really gone through and started to assess what different growth opportunities there were, and then getting out to the community at a series of workshops. And then this last and third phase that we've been in is given that direction on the various options, what are some of the development standards that both the city and the county should be considering? And based on analysis of the codes that you have in place today and also development review process, then kind of checking back in with some of the folks that we met in early on in the process, say, okay, we heard you. Now here's some of the direction we'd like to go in. What's your thoughts, your concerns, and your support? And got a pretty good sense of that. And now we're really into this phase of starting to draft some regulations and some processes, and we need your help. Tonight, we have a series of questions that we're posing for you that we'd really like to get some direction on. I think would be very helpful. And then, we're going to springboard into going back out to the community once again, once we get that direction, and then really going into more of an adoption phase, that fourth phase, where we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of an intergovernmental agreement. Next slide, please. So, through this process, we've had a lot of community engagement. And you can see in the various phases what's been accomplished here. We had community interviews, as I mentioned, the first phase. We had a questionnaire. We also had a questionnaire in the second phase. And we're continuing with those questionnaires as we go through the process, just as people kind of getting them acquainted with the various concepts that are being brought forward, understanding their preferences. We've had a Intergovernmental Committee, and then a series of events. Mostly it was during the month of July, but they've gone into August, and now this fall, early fall, we'll be going back and meeting with folks. So we have some public open houses coming up, and then of course this session, and we're going to have some other ones with appointed officials. Next phase. Next slide, please. So some of you have seen this. Very quickly, I'm going to go through the scenarios that we've discussed to date, shared these with community members, and gotten some direction. So very conveniently named A, B, and C. They're not really in order other than If you look at A, that would be the most, I'll call it town-like. C is the most rural, and B is really kind of in between. So a little more of a suburban pattern. And what you'll notice here is an outer boundary that goes beyond the city limits today. The county has a comprehensive plan, city has a comprehensive plan. So we're doing is we're basically melding these elements, city and county, together and saying, what is the community of Laramie? Ultimately, how large is it going to be in terms of its footprint? And then what should that pattern potentially be? And so you can see these different colors that are assigned, and we're going to talk about this in just a second. So next slide, please. So getting into these different scenarios very quickly. So scenario A, as I mentioned, being the most town-like. So imagine that you have the town as it is today, and it's sort of at the perimeter of the existing city. It would grow and expand at a very similar type of pattern. So very similar densities. I think that one of the differences here, you've got some commercial centers. So one at the interstate and 30th, you can see that sort of that red area, that a community commercial center. We have another commercial center, that red dot sort of on the north end of 30th, and then another one up in the northwest area. So you can see that these centers that provide some essential services are provided. And then the density gradients on all these images are kind of easy to follow. The lightest sort of yellowish color, tan, that is going to be the lowest density. And then that gradient, as you get down into the browns, it gets into the higher density of housing. And then you can see some of these patterns that are, well, with the university, they're crosshatched. It's actually interesting that you just met with the university, and they've said that these areas that are shown in crosshatch would be retained as basically an agricultural use. So this is scenario A. So next slide. This is kind of what we heard people critiquing A. They said, yeah, they like this, this notion that you're going to provide sort of a kind of a natural growth and extension of what's been happening in the community today. It allows some space for, I'll call it more suburban sized lots, single family lots, but also has that some greater density around some commercial centers. They also thought they would like to see some changes. So less space for maybe some of the estate residential, more parks and open space. So again, more of a town-like pattern. So next slide, please. So we gone on to the scenario B, again, more suburban. So think of more detached single-family housing at a larger lot. So, 5,000 to 15,000 square foot lots would be, quite typical. So that'd be that kind of that ochre color here. And then as you get further out, again, a lot of single family housing, but at a lesser density of that, but not particularly rural. So next slide, please. And then I think people liked this idea that, a lot of the housing that we've heard are very popular. Folks, they like a detached single family house with maybe a little bit larger lot, not huge, you can maintain it. It didn't restrict folks in the county with that pattern as much. It kept it sort of the industrial away from the center of town. They thought that was really good. But they still thought, some still thought that was a little too urban. They didn't think it promoted as affordable housing as well as scenario A. Next slide, please. And then we get on to scenario C, and this is by far the most rural. And you can see how the colors are lighter. You've got the southeast area, predominantly single family. There's a kind of a crosshatch there, north of the south of the interstate rather, and also the far north end. That denotes an area where you've got a more rural, larger lot development, but with an option to have some units clustered. So you retain more open land in exchange for aggregating the density in some smaller pockets. And we're going to get into some details with the code here in just a few minutes on that. And so if you can go to the next slide, there was, I think philosophically, a lot of people love this from the standpoint of it's more green, it's more open, it feels more rural, it's more agricultural. But on the other hand, a lot of folks say, hey, it's pretty spread out. And, a lot of folks say that they want the big lot, but they can't necessarily maintain it. It's one where you're probably pricing out a lot of folks that when they come into the market, they say, sort of the missing piece of this is more attainable housing options. It's going to have difficulty providing those options with this pattern. So if you go to the next slide. So it kind of, we laid all these out, and what we heard, I think, was a large preference for elements of scenario A, but with some adjustments, some tweaks. So, some areas then, so if you think of the southwest area there, close to the river, so much lower density there, still allowing these, some commercial centers, but maybe a little bit less intensity in some areas, still allowing the sort of that southeast quadrant to have a lot of single family housing, maybe not quite to the same low density as scenario C. So really kind of a melding of A, a little bit of B, and a little bit of C. And this has been very interesting. So we've met with several of the stakeholder groups, the South Utility District. We've met with the 4 major property owners here, the 4 largest, including the university, and a whole host of folks out in the community. And we've heard, frankly, a lot of support. And I don't want to just generalize and say, oh, yeah, everybody loves this scenario, because, we've heard from some folks that honestly are probably not going to be satisfied with any type of change. They have an attitude that it's more hands-off, their property rights, and people should just be able to do whatever's their preference. So I think but that's a relatively small subset. But by and large, we've heard a lot of positive support from these various groups when we've shared this preferred scenario. So where we sit today is that this draft would be considered what we're bringing forward with the Joint Growth Area Plan. Now, that obviously there could be some adjustments to this, but we're feeling quite confident after these conversations that this would be the Joint Growth Plan. So this kind of ring around the city. So, okay, that's sort of the easy part. Now we've got a vision. People are feeling good about it. Then, all right, it gets down to the nuts and bolts. So how would you regulate, whether city or county? What's the development process look like? You have one today. How would that change? And then how do you solidify that through an agreement? So we're getting down to some details. Next slide. These are the categories. I'm not going to go through this more other than just to note that optional rural residential cluster, which is that crosshatch pattern on the sort of the left side. Next slide. So some of the big concepts, when you look at that plan that we just were sort of looking at in sort of the overall view of the community, what I think people really like this idea, first of all, of a boundary that is kind of defining what the growth could be in Laramie. What is reasonable to expect in terms of providing urban levels of services out from the core of the city today? And a lot of folks thought that was a good idea, to coordinate service, whether city or county or special districts, and that you're not having this sort of leapfrog development. So out in places where you can't provide that full complement of services. And then really having these commercial centers that would support different types of housing close by. These would be some more of the essential services, and provide some walkable neighborhoods in those areas, and really give some of the more perimeter sort of subdivisions and neighborhoods in the community access to some of those services. And then also to use some of the natural features that are so prominent in Laramie as a way to promote the form. So you think of the wetlands in the riparian areas by the river, and there are a lot of drainage ways that cut across the community. And we're looking at those being sort of the demarcation areas or edges of neighborhoods, and maybe it's providing access for future trail system, but these features then helping provide that framework. And then so the other thing is this notion of keeping sort of a rural character and accommodating some urban growth at the edges. And a lot of people, I think, support those concepts. So next slide, please. So when we think about the overall pattern, it gets down to, all right, how are you going to use the regulatory zoning to basically transform from the overall vision to something that would be regulated on the ground. And then you get to, okay, what do the streets look like? Because we've got some areas that are rural streets, some are urban streets. They have to connect together. How do you do that in a way that functions well? And then procedurally, if you're somebody in the development community, a property owner, and you want to develop within this area, what are the steps? What are the mechanics of it? Next step. Next slide, please. So some of the key questions, and I was going to introduce these, and then we're going to go on, and then we're going to show these questions again. So we're going to talk about clustering of residential development. And, there's different ways to incentivize. The main one I think we're going to talk about are density bonuses, but there's some other things you can do. What would be appropriate to consider? The city has a sort of a rural residential district. Is this the right district to implement the state residential that's been shown on the plan? And then should the county adopt the city districts or vice versa to implement this overall land use plan? And there's some pros and cons there we're going to talk about. Next slide, please. So probably obvious, but when you look at the city code and the county code, and you think about these land use categories, that's the left-hand column, where you have and you've got some photographs on the right that explain, what we mean by, what do we mean by a ranchette? What do we mean by state residential or suburban residential? And I think it's pretty easy to follow, but if you look at the gaps, maybe stating the obvious, but the city doesn't do a very good job in its regulations of allowing or accommodating the more rural types of development patterns, where the county is the opposite, the more urban types of densities. So how do we consider ways to fill in a matrix like this with zoning? So it is that the county adopts some new standards sort of to fill in, and the city also adopts some standards to fill in on both the lower end and the higher end. These are all things to be considering as we start moving forward. Next slide. So, we started, with this notion of the clustering of development. And, I think overall folks like this idea of, you've got an area that you want to preserve more of the rural character, and you aggregate by having maybe the same overall density, but you aggregate the units in let's say one corner, one portion of the site, and you keep the rest of it open. And you can aggregate those open spaces, and it makes it seem a lot more open. We've seen some ways to do that in other communities, and we're going to talk about that. So one option would be to provide some density bonuses in the existing county SLR district. And this has been done in other places. So maybe you get a little bit of a density bump, maybe that's an incentive. You could also create specific design standards that are for a zone district that allow cluster development without a bonus, but it's just, you do it, you don't have to go through anything special. And then the last one would be to do what we call a Plein Air Development, which is a little more involved process, and you would go through that to identify a cluster development plan. So some different ways to do it. And it would be helpful to understand from sort of the pros and cons tonight, if you had any notions about how we might want to do that. Next slide, please. So when we looked at different codes, the one example that we found from Wyoming is Teton County. They have some metrics that they use, and they have their density bonuses, and it says, all right, if you're in this rural planned residential development district, if you have 70% of the site is open space, and also has to be greater than 49 acres, you can have no minimum lot size. That way, you you can pack in more units, but you keep most of the area as open. Then there's also a floor area option where you can transfer from one parcel to another parcel. In this case, let's say if you take that ring around Laramie, you could transfer from one area to another and have a 90% open space requirement. And then there's another that would be you'd have a planned residential development where you would have 70 acres of a minimum size and 90% of open space. So there's ways that Teton County, Wyoming has structured these performance standards. Now, I'm going to just tell you that this is a concept that was brought forward in Teton County, but has not been used yet. So, whether it's successful, we can't say we have a test case in the state of Wyoming, to the best of our knowledge, where this specific technique or these metrics have been used. Next slide. And then when you look at these by right standards, one way to, I think, make it more simple than having the complexity is to have by right standards for cluster development. So if you meet these standards, you don't have to go through a PUD process. So again, no density bonus. Let's say you could have 20 units by right. You could have 20 units with a cluster development, and it would not be a minimum size for a project. So there are ways to structure it and make that work. And we think there's probably a place in there to do that. It gets a little tricky, but it could be done. Next slide. And then the next option is to use what we call a Plein Air Development. And PUDs, a lot of communities use them, and they like them. Other communities don't, because it oftentimes takes more time to get through the process. It's more complex. The city already has PUD standards. So they allow that flexibility. It would take the Planning Commission and the council to review a PUD. You can do, in this case, there are density bonuses for low-income housing units. So there's some provision already in the city to have PUDs. The county does not have an existing PUD ordinance. So some things to decide there. So next slide, please. So the existing rural residential in the city appears to be probably the best fit when you think about the state residential land use category that we saw. We think that could be a pretty good fit. So there's really there's a question here about is this really the best way to implement that residential land use category by taking basically these metrics and then possibly just going ahead and applying them to the county. Next slide. So getting back to the questions, and I have to apologize, this was a lot of information sort of to lay on all of you. But we have these questions that I think would be helpful to get some direction. When you think about these clustering incentives, and again, for the most part, the examples that we find are density bonuses. But does this make sense for us to investigate one of these techniques? Is the way the city's rural residential district, is that the right one to implement this state residential land use category that we defined? And then lastly, should the county go through and adopt more of the city districts that have already sort of on the books, and then vice versa to do that? That the city would take more of the county standards? Is that maybe a way to go through this process? I mean, there's different ways to do it. So we can come back to these at the end of the presentation. So next slide, please. So we're not going to go into great detail here, but one of the things I think is important is for the urban area, as the growth area develops over time, is to have streets that line up where it makes sense where you're going from more rural to more urban. And it gets a little difficult because in your community, you have some very rural areas and you have more town-like, more urban areas. And so how do you make these two fit together? So we spent some time looking at, if you look at the top couple of images, these are more rural roads, and we're thinking, first of all, that sort of the standard is that if you have a rural roadway and you're within this planning area, that they would be paved, and that's different than we have today, where you have county roads that are gravel, and there may be instances in the future where it makes sense because of the density, because of maybe the distance. We're talking about the edge of town, the character that remains gravel, but we're thinking that the baseline is to have pavement. Also, you have, the drainage in the county is very different. You have these open swales where you're taking drainage off the street into the swale. You generally do not have sidewalks. If I think in the second image you'll see there, sort of the middle top, it shows a pedestrian path. Maybe that's a gravel fines trail, maybe it's a sidewalk, and that would be kind of on a case-by-case basis. So we think there's a way to sort of maybe up some of the standards a little bit in the county to make them a little more city-like, but still retain that rural character. And then when we get into sort of the city standards, how do the city cross-sections that you have today, largely, whether they be a local street, a collector street, or an arterial street, how would they mesh with these more rural roads? And we're thinking that there's a way to do that through some improvements where you would take the stormwater, for example, from your swales, and then it would then go into inlets to go into the city drainage system, for example. And so we think there are a lot of subtleties here, and as development would occur, a lot of coordination between city and county, the roads department and the public works department to be able to work together to make that happen. But we've met with engineers from both city and county, and we think there's some solutions in here. Next slide, please. So, just going to those street cross sections, do these make sense? Again, it's a lot of information in a short period of time. When you heard the description of these cross sections, are there some questions or concerns that you have with the way that you would sort of enforce these standards, the way that the rural would transition to the urban, and how it would all work, frankly, during the development process? So next slide, please. I think I'm just going to have you, if you could just go through all of these. We can come back at the end. If you could just go through all of these slides in succession, and just go to the next one, please. And then we will just go through those just very quickly. If you can just go, just to show you this as greater detail. We can come back to these if you have specific questions. So continue on, next slide. So the sort of the next piece of this is procedural. So right now the county has a process for subdivisions and development applications, and it's different for the county and the city. So city, for example, for like a 2-lot land division, it's administrative, sort of staff level type of review. And if it's a larger 3 or more lots, it goes to the planning commission and then on to the council. And then a plan unit development is, again, planning commission and the council. Where the county, it's a little bit different. Smaller subdivision is planning and zoning, and then it goes to the commissioners, and then subdivision, the larger ones as well. And then the larger, there's some exceptions, I guess, for based on their subdivision types, but basically the county process is a little bit different. So should there be any changes to that? I guess that would be a question for both staff and leadership. Next slide, please. So when you think about these processes, do you think there's any changes potential that should be made? Kind of a hard question, and I think it's a key one. When you have areas that parcels that are not abutting the city, they're not contiguous. Under the law, you can't annex. So if they're they're just outside of that area, and I'm going to show you some examples. How do you sort of reconcile this for service provision? So you're developing in the county at maybe a higher density than you had today because it would meet the new plan. but wouldn't be annexed. So how do you sort of, how do you go through that procedurally or regulatory process? What's the best way to handle that? So next slide, please. So today, right now, think of this 1 mile buffer that goes around the city into the county. So if you're in that area, you're a developer, your development plans get referred to the city, and the city provides comment. Then the applicant can say, well, appreciate the comments, but I'm either going to do it or I'm not going to do it. And the city has no specific authority. The applications for subdivision are a little bit different than that. So there's another way to do this would be having sort of a joint city and county planning staff review. So the staffs of the two departments from the city and county would get together, review the application, maybe provide comments. Another would be mandatory review by the staff, but sort of an optional compliance with the city standards. Let's say this was out in the county. So it's sort of mandatory compliant review, and then non-mandatory compliance. And then another would be if you had a joint planning commission, city county for land within the urban area, and basically make a decision recommendation. That one I think is pretty cumbersome, and we're going to go to the next slide, please. So as I was referencing before, so one of these things, let's take some of these parcels that are circled in white here. So they would not be eligible for annexation. Let's say a developer comes in one of these areas and says, hey, I want to develop, and if it was contiguous, the county would say, yeah, go talk to the city because it would be annexed and you meet the city standards. But if they're not contiguous, you would not have an annexation. So how do you handle that situation? How does the county process the development? It's an interesting question. We're not exactly sure what the best fit is here. We'd like to have some guidance. So next slide, please. So as I was mentioning, there's a couple of ways that you can annex based on state statutes. One is it's contiguous. So it abuts the city in a point, and you would go through that process. And the other would be if the city were the sole owner of territory that's outside of that area, they can annex. But there's pretty limited opportunities. So really, it's mostly where you have parcels that are immediately abutting or contiguous with the boundary. So the county generally does not provide that full range of urban level of services. It doesn't do it. It doesn't. It usually provides, for example, sewer service for higher density development. So how do you then have this sort of phasing in of service as you're developing in the county? And we really would love to hear your perspective on this. It's not an easy, quick answer, and one I think we've struggled with. So next slide, please. So some of these procedural questions, going back to more succinctly. So as development application it comes in, what do you think is the preferred method for that review and approval? And then for parcels that are not eligible for annexation that could develop to city standards, how do you reconcile that service provision? Next slide, please. So when we get through all those tough questions, really all the intergovernmental agreement says, okay, we've decided on what the metrics are going to be for regulation in the city and the county. We decided what the processes are going to be for applications that come in. Now this agreement solidifies that. And the agreement's a little bit longer of a process to develop. We have to go through a state requirement, actually a state review at the end of this process for the agreement to be basically blessed by the state, which will add a little bit to our process. But the IGA would be then a city and county then executed agreeing to these terms. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to conclude by going over the next steps. We're going to have a joint planning and zoning commission meeting coming up here on September 22nd. There's going to be a public open house on September 28th. And then in November, if everything continues on that same tack, we would have public hearings on the plan. And then that would be sort of immediately followed by the regulations being considered and then the intergovernmental agreement. That's the sort of the final step. So that's a lot of information, and I'll apologize in advance. There's a lot to cover there, but we'd really like to hear from you all from procedural, regulatory standpoint, what your perspective is about the joint growth area plan in terms of the overall concept. So thank you again for your time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Gloss. We're going to start with the Commissioner's Chamber and Commissioner Gosar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate it. And Mr. Gloss, thanks for the presentation. I have a couple of questions, and this is a lot of information, so sorry, they're probably be pretty simplistic in nature. I wonder if you have any examples of towns equivalent in size that have undergone this process, and some that it's worked out for, and some that it didn't work out for, and what was the difference in your mind?
Well, there are a lot of communities. I would start by, I think, looking at places like Oregon and Washington, for example, that have mandatory statewide planning, that have a required urban growth boundary for every single community, where cities and counties have intergovernmental agreements, and I can state, many communities. You can imagine there's a lot of communities in both of those states, and they have a process, but that's also at a state level. So the state, frankly, dictates the parameters of their planning, whether it's service provision, it's land use, and it's not Wyoming, and we'll just admit that it's a sort of a different landscape in many respects. And then there are many communities here in the state of Colorado that have a very similar situation. I can just speak from my professional experience as the former planning director of Fort Collins, that a very strong relationship between the city of Fort Collins and Laramie County, where there's an IGA. There are, I can tell you, there are joint standards for streets, for example, but they're not joint development standards. So each have separate development standards, and they have referral processes that are abided by. And then, you can go down the Colorado Front Range. I can think of several other communities that have those relationships with the adjacent county, many of which we have worked in as a firm. And, I can list several of those if you're interested. But, I think Wyoming, it's a little more it's a little different. We did mention Teton County, Wyoming, and the Jackson, and I think for some people, if you're in other parts of Wyoming, you say that, well, Jackson is an anomaly, but that is a Wyoming example where you do have that relationship. There are also, I'd have to say that that Cheyenne and Laramie County also has a very strong working relationship where they have some joint agreements and have worked very closely. So, it's not unprecedented, but I'd have to say in Wyoming, it would be more the exception that you would have this tight of a relationship between the two within, a growing urbanizing area.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'd be interested in some of those best practices. Also, Mr. Gloss, something strikes me as if property was not annexable maybe right now. It might behoove organizations, both at the city and the county, to plan as if it might be able to be. So streets lining up, sewer systems maybe lining up. do you have any midpoint steps? Like for instance, a subdivision that was outside of an annexable piece of property now to have a central sewer collecting system so that if it did become part of the city, you would have a direct shot to the city's sewer system or water lines or anything that like that. I think there might be a mid step, maybe. I'm hoping.
Well, you bring up a good point, and one thing I just have to come clean. Part of our analysis is to look at the utilities and look at the area collectively and do an assessment. And unfortunately, that is not quite complete. We thought it would be done quite a while ago. The subconsultant team that is working with us, they're still not quite done with it. And that is an excellent question. And I think we still, I think we have our fingers crossed that there are no fatal flaws in our thinking with this pattern of that preferred plan. And we're going to find out, my fingers are crossed, and it's this next week. And then another piece of this, once that utility analysis is done, we'll be doing some physical modeling to say, okay, what are the implications financially for the city and the county? Sort of, it won't be, super detailed, but sort of order of magnitude, what's the impact for the city services as this area develops over time, and also for the county. So both of those pieces, again, hopefully done relatively soon so that we can be coming back to you all as decision makers and saying, okay, we've run the numbers, we've looked at utilities, and this is how things are going to function. So again, I apologize that we don't have that information yet, but it's a great question, and it's an important concern, is how you're going to provide urban services and in a cost-effective way.
Okay, and then Commissioner Rivera has something for us.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Mr. Gloss, for your presentation tonight. It's great. It's a lot of information coming to us all at once. And I'm just asking if we can get this presentation, this PowerPoint, whether from you or from Derek, whomever. I'd like to be able to look at it slower and closer and all. And then I want to apologize to the City Council for not having consistent representation for this intergovernmental subcommittee from the commission side. We obviously know why, and just want to apologize that there hasn't been more input consistently from the commission side.
Chairman Gosar, commissioners, in the world of meeting scheduling and attendance, it can be tough, and that's just how it goes. We certainly understand. I also want to extend that request to see this information, Mr. Gloss. I know you can provide that for us, or Mr. Teeny can, because as you've heard a couple of different times, it's a lot, and I think it's good to get the presentation from you, but then it also just that kind of creates just the first start, right? That's the lecture. Now we got to go study the textbook. Chairman Gosar, Commissioner Ibarra, I don't want to go any further until you guys have had all your questions answered.
Just one other comment. I do want to acknowledge that David for being involved for the county side on this as well. So thank you for that, David.
Mr. Chief? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, one last one. Mr. Gloss, in light of the fact that the Pilot Hill area has come online and probably will become more important to the community, does the plan that is being suggested preclude other arteries, bike arteries, to get from the west side to Pilot Hill without having to cross traffic? Would that be available in the plan as you think about it?
Well, if you go to that preferred plan, we put a lot of effort into showing where trails could potentially be located within the joint growth area. But what is not shown, though, is really what's happening already within the city. And, it's one of those things where, we've been tasked with looking at this donut around the city, but not really looking in the center. And so that, there are a lot of connections. If you were to take a look at that preferred growth plan, you can see where an elaborate trail system would connect to Pilot Hill, to the north and to the south, and then all the existing trails or planned trails for Pilot Hill itself. Those are actually shown on the plan. And you can imagine with the adopted plans that the city has for its transportation system, multimodal system, where those connections will be. But we have not shown them specifically on the plan because essentially they're already reflected, to the best of my knowledge, on the existing city transportation plan. I don't know if Derek has any additional comments.
Go ahead, Derek. And I know you were waiting to speak earlier, so go ahead and put both comments in right now. Go for it. Thank you.
Mayor, Commissioner, just to the more immediate question. I mean, I think, as Cameron mentioned, I mean, the interior to the city, the connections that are reflected, whether it's Pilot Hill or other areas outside the city, aren't the focus of this plan. However, they are there in some of your other plans. I think what's important, though, is looking at the land use components in those areas, showing that we're recognizing the importance of Pilot Hill and some of those other connections, because that's what this plan is really focused on, is that land use component. And it could be followed up with some of that more detailed work related to trails or things like that. So I guess I'd kind of leave it at that. And then just to the previous comment, the presentation that you see tonight and then will be posted on our website. And then the county has the exact same website essentially as us too. And so we'll have that available not only to the council and commissioners, but to the public as well, so that they can kind of take a look at it and really dig in, which is what we want. So
I suspected that comment might be something about that accessibility. If I could just make a request on behalf of the council, if we could just get that bumped in an email also, that would be really great. And I suspect that would be helpful for the commissioners as well. Chairman Gosar.
That's it, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Cameron, and thank you, Derek, for those answers. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah, all right. I've got Councilmember Harrington up here. We'll come back around for questions too. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Gloss, one of the things that I was curious about as this process unfolded, and I was sort of looking quickly as we went through those maps. I think maybe the fear might be a strong word, but the fear that I might bring to this is that by adding sort of like this gradiated development as it moves outward from this 1 mile radius that we are looking at now, we're sort of building maybe like an area where the city can flex. But if we talk about growth in the long term, I'm curious, in your experience, if you've seen cities that develop into a more like rural residential or like 15,000 square foot lot residential, and then come back on the other side of that to a multi-unit type dense development, and how that plays out. So I guess the real question is, do you have examples of communities that have sort of started this sprawl and then brought it back without disconnecting that sort of dense development on the other side of the rural residential? Because it does seem like we would want to leave spaces in our town to grow in a dense way, so that sort of multimodal and public transit option remains an option as we sort of expand for those communities.
Well, that's a great question. I think if you spend some time taking a look at that growth plan, I think what you'll see though is there's a gradient, and it's more rural, but quite frankly, the southeast areas where the more rural qualities are retained. I have to say, to the northeast, the northwest, and to kind of the far, the west side, it really won't be that rural. You're going to have a lot more housing types than you have today that could be provided, and the densities would actually go up, and there's an opportunity to make it pretty walkable. So, when I was speaking to sort of the rural part, I really, if you get down to the details of the plan, it's largely a pattern that's been established already in the sort of the southeast quadrant. So if you you drive out there, you look at an aerial photograph or Google Earth, and you look at the pattern of development today, you'll see that there's some pretty big lots, and it's not that easy to sort of infill and redevelop those areas. What we're thinking is that you'll have a lot of sort of a continuation of the pattern that you have today. And there's not probably a huge opportunity to dramatically change that. But the other areas outside of that sort of the southeast quadrant, you could see a fair amount of more attainable, for Laramie, definitely more dense housing options, particularly as you think about the areas in the far northeast. The Samuelson property, there's we show that in the preferred plan. Some very walkable neighborhoods that are more mixed use. We show it the new commercial center there at 30th and the interstate. They're on Curtis and the sort of the northwest part of the urban area. So I really think there's a lot of housing that can be built, and also some of these other commercial services that are shown that aren't out there today. So I would just ask that you take a look at that. And then just kind of the second part of your question is, where have we seen densities increase where you have it more rural? And I have to say, it's pretty tough to do, because often what happens is you'll have lots subdivided, and let's say it's a 2-acre lot. And what people tend to do is they put the house right in the middle of the lot. And then re-subdividing, it's pretty tough. You can have some creative infill where you do some flag lots and do some clustering, but oftentimes sort of the die is cast and you can't change it. I've seen it in a lot of communities, and I don't have any great examples of where there have been sort of creative rural infill.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, Mr. Glass, that was sort of my general understanding, but you are the expert here and I am far from it. So my thought was that we would be boxing ourselves in with sort of rural development into sort of like a continuation of rural development ad nauseum. So I guess I would just wrap up. Thank you for pointing me in those directions. I'll look at a little closer at that map once we have it, and I appreciate it. Thanks, Mayor.
Yeah, Councilmember Harrington and Mr. Cheney had some additional input for your question. Go ahead, Mr. Cheney.
Mayor and council and commissioners, just to Member Harrington's question too, and Cameron hit it on the head, but I want to reiterate it. That's the purpose of this plan. Is it's so difficult to go back. It's once you start getting yourself boxed in, once you start having that rural interface with the urban area and then having to leapfrog with urban again, it becomes very difficult. And I think Cameron's correct. There aren't a lot of success stories, and that's why you do these plans, is so that you don't have to be one of those success stories or more likely failures. You can actually just avoid that scenario and plan for logical and good growth that's economically, fiscally responsible for the community and makes sense for the land and the areas that we're trying to grow. So I think it's really important to make sure that point's heard across this group and everyone here. So
thank you, Mr. Cheney. Yeah, that's a major part of what this effort is all about, is a plan. It doesn't have to be like something in Washington or Oregon. It doesn't have to be like something in Teton County. The idea is to have a plan that'll guide some good decision making, that'll help with public infrastructure, emergency services, and these other things that we've discussed. And I think that really, right, that's the big heart of this discussion. And then, Mr. Gloss, what we're doing here is we're trying to figure out what's a good way to do that for Laramie, Wyoming, and Albany County. Other questions? Other questions on this? A lot of info, so I appreciate that. There may be some need to process before people are ready. I don't see a lot of hands up right now. It's question time. Otherwise, I'm going to go to public comment and then I'll come back. Public comment. I had a hand raised. I'm going to call on Micah Richardson. You have the floor. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm curious, when you collected the feedback from folks, how much feedback you received, first of all, and if you were able to kind of differentiate from those who are living in the county versus those who are in the city, and just a bit of a picture about the responses. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd have to say, we have the numbers in terms of the overall participants, and I think I showed a slide earlier that had some of those numbers. We were out at several events around town. As I mentioned, the questionnaire responses, we have this very specifically. Where I'd have to say where it's been a little bit of a struggle. If we anecdotally, some of the, a lot of the folks we talk to, they'll offer, well, I live in the county or I live in the city. But when we're having a face-to-face conversation, it's not really sort of front and center. We don't, confront people, hey, are you a city resident or county resident? So we can't, pin down exactly where everybody is coming from. Some of the responses we get that are very specific, they'll say, yeah, I'm a city resident or county resident. I'd say just anecdotally, as an observation, we have had probably a higher percentage of city participants that we have as county. And I don't know how else to describe it other than that's our sense of things, given the responses that we've had so far. We've tried to go out to, say, the county farmers market, some of the other more, I'll call it county-oriented events, some of the farm and ranch types of events, and the attendance has been a little bit lower. So again, I can't speak to exact numbers, but I think that's our general impression.
Mr. Gloss, this question and the answer touches on something that I think really frustrates me, which is that even here, we're differentiating between city and county residents when the true reality is we're all county residents. There are those of us that live within the city limits, and then there are those of us that live in the rural areas. But that distinction beyond that doesn't exist, right? So that's another, I think, difficult part about this. Let's see if we have other public comment. It doesn't look like it. Commissioners. Yeah.
I have one final question. Mr. Gloss, did you, with the preferred plan, if it had a full build out as suggested, adopted the plan and had the full build out, what kind of extra housing units are you talking about? Is this something that would serve the city and the county well for 10 years? Is it a 5-year plan? Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah. I don't know how many decades, but it goes out several decades. We are actually going through that exercise, taking a look at the sort of the preferred plan and equating that to an exact a number of units with some assumptions, obviously, about how much areas are open space and rights of way and so forth. And we'll arrive at a number. But looking at the absorption rate, meeting with folks in the development industry, I can just tell you, just based on experience, that you have several decades of growth that can be accommodated with this plan. But we are going to get down to those numbers, and we're going to be able to describe more specifically exactly how many units, a range anyway, a reasonable range.
Thank you. That's super. Thanks, Mr. Gloss. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Chairman. Okay, other questions here. Really appreciate this presentation. Going to be taking a look at the study materials, if you will. I encourage everybody else that has an interest in this process to do the same. Probably don't need my encouragement to do that if they're already interested in this process, but all the same. All right. Well, I don't see a lot of questions. And again, I think that more comes from a space of wanting to know what are good questions and being more informed before we go much further on that, Mr. Gloss. So don't take that as a ho-hum response. Take that as I really need to think about this response. And again, you probably don't need to hear that from me, but I think it needs to be said nevertheless. All right. Well, Mr. Chairman, one last chance over there for folks before we close this work session topic and move on to the next piece.
Well, I would just applaud Mr. Gloss and his folks for getting out there. I talked and stopped at your booth at both Freedom Has a Birthday during Jubilee days. That was fantastic. I was wondering if, and I had raised this in another meeting, is there an opportunity to reach out to folks with the lower socioeconomic status to see what kind of city that they or county they might envision and get their feedback?
Yeah, I think with all of our plans, we try to define folks that are typically not involved in the process, and it's a common challenge. I can commit to you that we will, as we get through the next couple of months, in sort of digesting all the material and hearing back from some of our stakeholders, we're going to continue to, hate to say it, pound the pavement to talk about the issues with folks that are typically not involved. That's very important to our firm. I think we've done that pretty much in every plan we've worked on. So I can just commit to you that we're going to continue to the best of our abilities to get those folks involved.
Okay.
Thanks, appreciate it. Thanks, Mr. White, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, commissioners, again, and for your time this evening. I think we're ready to proceed now with the rest of our work session as scheduled. And commissioners, just one more thanks for your time this evening, and we'll say goodbye for now, but not forever. And we'll see you in the very near future. Thank you very much, and thank you as well to the county clerk and whoever else is there that I can't see.
Good night, all. Thank you.
All right. So, council, that's a lot of information, isn't it? We'll go back and look at it, I'm sure. The city clerk sent that to your email in case you didn't get a chance to see it, the presentation. Thank you, city clerk, for doing that right away. Appreciate it very much. And I feel like I'm going to need to read it 2 or 3 times. But I think the general shape of it's pretty clear. Appreciate your questions too, everybody. Let's go to updates and comments if there are any. I've got Councilmember Schuster, and then I'll go to Councilmember Gabriel next. It was real close.
Thank you very much. Wyoming Territorial Park will be doing one of its biggest events they always do every year that goes over huge, because last year we even ran out of pumpkins. It'll be the Pumpkin Walk. It is on Saturday, October 5th. Oh boy, I got the wrong date. The 12th. Excuse me. I'm not sure on the date. I'm really going to be in trouble here, but it has a year on here and it's not the right year on it. So it'll always be on a Saturday. It's 12 to 4. It's usually one of the first Saturdays in October. And I brought up a thing, and boy, it just burned me for Googling it. So yeah, that's the way it is.
Okay.
I'm also going to do a thing on the rifle range. They are in sight-in season, so they're open every Saturday, Sunday for the next month out at the rifle range. And they can go onto the website and check for times. Saturday is, I believe, 10 to 4, and Sunday is 11 to 3, if I remember correctly on that one. So I will stop there and not make fun of myself anymore. Thank you.
Councilmember Schuster, it's pretty amazing you can remember all of that, so don't worry about it too much. And I know you're right in your approximation about that pumpkin thing, and it is popular, so don't worry about it. Nobody's going to get on your case for not remembering the dates. I've got Councilmember Gabriel next, or wait, maybe Councilmember Harrington. Yeah.
Point of information. While Councilor Schuster was talking, I just looked it up real fast to save him on that one. It looks like it's October 8th.
Great. Pumpkin patch, whatever it is. I can't remember I can't even remember the name of the event. October 8th. Charlie Brown is going to be there. and Snoopy and Peppermint Patty and everybody else. All right, Councilmember Gabriel.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Gave an opening talk to this group that came to Laramie for a convention today. It's called the Wyoming Environmental Health Association.
Yeah.
Out of the Holiday Inn on behalf of council in the city of Laramie. Individuals from the Wyoming Department of Health, Department of Ag, Wyoming City County Health Departments, and the Rural Water Association were at this meeting to update their certification, 2.5-day meeting. So on behalf of the city, a little welcome, what was going on in the city, talked a little bit about construction on the university campus and so on. Real nice group. And as my little gift, they gave me a bird cage. No, a bird house, not cage, a bird house made out of license plates made at the Women's Correction Center in Lusk. Very unique gift for sure. I've never seen anything quite like it, but that's what they do there. They have some construction activities for the inmates, and it was very uniquely done. And I encourage everyone, you can buy those online and so on. But it was a very nice birdhouse that I received as a little parting gift. Also, I wanted to bring up, tomorrow night is the Laramie Parks and Recreation Board meeting, and I know some of those board members would like to meet in person, but we have a policy from the city, and Assistant City Manager Todd has talked about the city council's policy of not meeting in person. I was just wondering if this topic comes up for discussion tomorrow night, is that a possibility for some members? If they wanted to meet in person, they could do so? Or how does the council feel about that?
So, Councilmember Gabriel, and this came up last week as well, what I'd like you to do is, if it does come up at that meeting, ask people to forward that request to you, and then I would ask you to then kind of get that all together in one thought, if you will, or one message, and let me know. And I can tell you that I think for our boards and commissions and our council members, feel free to communicate that with me, and then I'll share it with the city attorney. For members of the public, they're welcome to directly send their communication to the city attorney. We're under consideration of this topic right now to find out how we're going to move forward.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gabriel. Other updates and comments? Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mayor. Just quickly, tomorrow morning begins the Laramie Main Street Alliance is hosting, sorry, Councilor Somerville, just stealing your board for you, but I'm going to be delivering a welcome remark at the beginning of the National Main Street Organization is hosting a community transformation workshop in town, following our Great American Main Street Award. And so I'll be giving that tomorrow morning, but expect to see Main Street folks from all over the place in Laramie over the next few days.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilor Harrington. I appreciate that because you jogged my memory. Want to give a quick update about DDA, fully up and functioning and filling those positions. They are working on a housing inventory for downtown, currently touring a lot of second floor spaces in downtown to try to get a better comprehensive look of the space that's available, and then potentially start looking at how to put together some programs to help those spaces get developed. I would just add that in addition to that, there was some discussion about parking in downtown that came along with that at the meeting today. That seems to always be a recurring issue and topic, parking in downtown, and I wish I had a good answer. But that was the update from DDA.
Thank you, Councilmember Somerville. Other updates, comments? from any of the committees? Okay. Seeing none. Let's have a quick agenda review, and we will call it a night. We'll start, of course, with any questions about the consent agenda. City Clerk, I have had a request forwarded to me for a proclamation, and I'll send you the draft of this right now because my memory is jogged, to add a proclamation for Hispanic Heritage for this month to be read at the 20th meeting. If I send that to you now, can we get that added in time?
Thank you, Mayor. I've actually been waiting for that proclamation.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
that's perfect. Yeah,
All
as
right.
soon as you send it, we'll go ahead and move forward with that. We put the Hispanic Month proclamation as a title, just as a placeholder, because I didn't have the actual proclamation yet at that point.
All right. Yeah, and I too have been waiting for a little bit of information to get to me about that, but I think we've got it now. I think folks wanted to kind of draft it and put their touch on it. I've got it, and I'll get to you immediately. Councilmember Harrington, did you have plenty of information on that?
No, Mr. Mayor, I'm just wildly out of order here, so I'm just going to go ahead and not speak.
Okay, we'll get to you. We'll get to you. Thank you, City Clerk, and I will get that to you. There was a last minute addition to one of the organizations that was looking to kind of be recognized as part of the community efforts there, and we got it taken care of. All right, and the only reason I got a hold of that is because somebody emailed it to me, and I said, "Oh, sure." Okay. Any other questions or last minute additions from the council, the consent agenda? Councilmember Somerville.
Are we sure we just don't want to add the one regular item that's a postponement to the consent agenda and wrap it all up?
Oh, yeah, I don't think we're going to be that lucky. But
thought I'd try.
Yeah, I hear you. Let's see. All right, everyone seems like they're in good shape with the consent agenda. I've got Councilmember Harrington who was waiting, and then I'll go to Councilmember Somerville. Councilmember Harrington.
Mr. Mayor, I just forgot an update, so I can wait for the end of the meeting if Councilor Doherty would like to go.
So,
I just had a question about if the ASUW rep is available. Maybe they could come next week to give that presentation.
during the regular meeting, I had that thought as well, since we have space. I will call and I need to communicate with that ASUW representative. And so I will do that, and I will see if they're available. Nancy, can we tentatively have that as an item? And we may have to, in the pre-meeting, if they're not available, eliminate it. But why don't we get it on there, given the relatively brief agenda that we've got? Does that seem reasonable to all the council members? Okay. Yep.
Will do, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, City Clerk. Scheduling's tough. We've got a lot of stuff going on, and we have a lot of partner agencies to work with. It's challenging. All right. Anybody else have anything for any piece of the agenda? All right. Well, that being said, I bet everybody'd like to go. So thanks and good night. See you soon.
Public comment one more time, or is this done?
Let's see. I don't have a spot for it. I can open it up for public comment.
I had one. I don't know if it's going down Grand tonight. I was passed by a motorcycle doing a wheelie on a dirt bike. No license plate, no headlights, no taillights. I'm a little worried about it because I've seen it about 6 times now in the town on dirt bikes with absolutely nothing on them riding the streets. So a little worried about it. Thought it should be mentioned.
Was it you, Councilor Schuster? You know.
All right. Councilor Schuster, you're able to do a comment or an update whenever you like. And I've got Councilor Harrington, I think, still has a comment. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. Just briefly, an LPAC update. So there are 2 murals being installed currently, and I just invite you all to swing by One of them is sort of behind Spectacle Emporium in downtown. That is by a visiting artist from New Mexico named Jody Herrera. It is really an outgrowth of the, I don't know how many of you have seen the mural that is inside the office of Coca Radio. There's sort of an effort to move that into a more public space. As part of that storytelling process, this mural is being crafted as well. There's also one along the Green Belt, where the Green Belt goes under I-80, sort of near Tri-Hydro. There's a mural being painted in there as well. So just those two updates, swing by and check them out if you get a minute.
Thank you. Yeah, Councilmember Gabriel, go for it.
Mayor, Councilor Schuster's comment kind of triggered something that we all received the other day about Colorado Street.
Yeah.
And Councilor Harrington mentioned that he had responded, but then the city manager beat him to it. And I'm just kind of wondering, because I was going to respond as well, but then I saw the email, and I'm just kind of wondering if we might just review maybe the policy on responding to citizens' comments, so we don't have everybody saying one thing and we maybe have a centered position like from the city manager on a question like that. Even though I think it's good that the council gets involved, but maybe it's best to have the city manager say, okay, I'm going to take care of this before city council members all get involved and say, you know, two different things or three different things, and the complainant is kind of wondering what's going on.
I really appreciate that question, Councilmember Gabriel. Now, as far as what you're asking about, the policy, we could have whatever policy we want, but of course, all 9 of us can communicate to whomever we'd like, whenever we'd like. I think the best practice from all the different council people I've worked with over the years is certainly to respond when, you know, if you're feeling like you should, and hopefully we all feel that way most of the time, to respond to someone and say, I understand this concern, and if you don't know, and chances are 90% of the time we may not know the exact in and out. So I want to look into this for you. Let me get some more information. I'll get back in touch with you, or somebody, or you might add somebody from the city staff who might know better than me. I think that's a great approach. And if everybody kind of sticks to that general idea, then I think we're in better shape. Let's distinguish. Like if somebody says, I don't know about my recycling, I think any one of us could say, oh, well, here, there's a spot on the city website. Go there. It'll tell you. I appreciate your confusion. Go check that out. But if it's something that's maybe a little more complicated and involved, my advice, and that's all it's going to be, and even if we put it in the code of conduct, let's be honest, that's all it's going to be, would be if you don't know, get the information and get back to them, or have staff people, or ideally maybe staff and the council people get back in touch with them. Because, of course, you want to be responsive to people. But I think that's been the understanding for many years, Councilmember Gabriel. That probably makes sense. I think it's all right to reach out and you know, have a couple of people do it. But I think there's a worry that maybe if people are saying a bunch of different things, and that's why if you don't know, I think it's better to say, let me find out. But I wanted you to let you know that I got your message and that I knew you were concerned and you were heard. That's the important part, I think, from the council end of it, right, is letting the person know that they've been heard and not ignored and paid attention to, and we'll get back to them. That's my opinion on it, because I think in terms of an actual standing policy about that, A, I don't know if there is one, and B, I don't know how we'd be able to follow it to the T. Councilmember Harrington, what do you think about that question?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just to make sure there's no confusion about it, that is precisely what occurred. The resident reached out. I said, I actually don't have a solution. So I reached out to Janine, who, when I indicated she was ahead of me, it wasn't that she had communicated to this person ahead of me. She had already begun finding a remedy, which I then just conveyed to the resident. And then to save you all from precisely what you're talking about, Councilor Gabriel, I sent that email to the rest of you so that no one would send an email saying something that maybe countered what the city was up to already. So that was really just a hedge on my part to try to save one of us from putting our foot in our mouth at some point. So, Mr. Mayor, I would agree with you. I think that is the right process. We certainly want to be responsive to our constituents, and this woman was a constituent of mine. So I thought that made sense. I hope that is in order with sort of the norms of council. I have not been, on the board as long as others. So that is typically my plan, and would enjoy to continue that.
I think so. And frankly, it's not for us to tell each other that we can't email people back or talk to people. I think the idea is if you don't know for sure, just be careful with that. And I think Councilmember Gabriel's nodding along with that. We wouldn't ever want to encourage a culture in the council where we just didn't email or call people back. And people wouldn't follow it anyway. I guess long story short is be careful if you're not 100% about the information or the answer to the question, and then follow up with the city staff. City manager, do you have some thoughts on that? Does that seem like the good way to go to you?
Yes, Mayor, I'm fine with everything you've said. And councilors, I could probably have sent you all an update yesterday to let you know that we were putting out the radar recorder and such. And I will be a little bit more proactive about that in the future.
Well, city manager, you're really busy too. And frankly, it's great that you're able to already start moving on citizen concerns. Maybe that's another little bullet point to add to this. Don't assume that the staff has ignored it, because they probably haven't, right? They're probably doing something about it. I see some more hands up. Go ahead, Councilmember Gabriel. Do you want to add to that?
I just wanted to convey to Councilor Harrington my appreciation for sending that out, because I just didn't want to have 2 or 3 different opinions going to that person saying, that you should be doing this or something else. I think that's the good way to convey something that has been dealt with, and so we don't get too much confusion among the public. Thank you.
And sometimes depending on the nature of the question, yours truly, what might say something like, well, my opinion on that is this personally, but I don't know where everybody else is. I think you're always safe with that too, right? Like, I think we ought to close Colorado Street, for example. I don't, but whatever. But I don't know if the other 8 people on council, you're always safe there, I think. Anybody else? Councilmember Harrington still got a hand up. Is that a leftover? Yep. Good question, Councilmember Gabriel. Thank you. Everybody ready to go? Say good night? All right. Thanks a lot. Good night, everybody. Appreciate all of your time. Thank you very much.
Night.